The rifle crack split the dawn air just as Natalie Olsen opened her mouth to mimic the sharp call of a red-tailed hawk, and she froze mid-breath, watching a lone rider emerge from the pine forest below her vantage point on the granite outcropping above Colorado City. It was late spring in 1876, and the Colorado mountains wore their newest green like a promise, wildflowers dotting the meadows in explosions of purple and gold. She had been coming to this spot every morning for 3 years now, ever since she arrived in this rough mining town tucked into the valley, and in those 3 years she had learned to identify every bird, every mammal, every creature that called these peaks home by their voice alone. Natalie pressed herself against the rock face, her worn calico dress catching on the rough stone. The rider below moved with purpose, guiding his bay horse through the creek that ran silver with snowmelt. Even from this distance, she could see he was broad-shouldered and tall, sitting the saddle like he had been born there. His hair hung past his collar, dark and wild, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew these mountains intimately. She waited until he disappeared down the trail toward town before releasing her held breath. Then she cupped her hands around her mouth and gave the hawk's cry she had been practicing, letting it echo off the canyon walls. A moment later, an answering call came from somewhere in the pines, and she smiled despite her racing heart. By the time she made her way back down the narrow deer trail to Colorado City, the sun had climbed high enough to paint the storefronts gold. The town was waking up properly now, miners heading to the claims that dotted the surrounding hills, women sweeping the boardwalks in front of their establishments. Natalie nodded to Mrs. Henderson outside the general store and hurried past the Lucky Strike saloon, keeping her eyes forward. She had come to Colorado City with her father 3 years ago, when she was 18 and he was chasing one last dream of striking it rich. Thomas Olsen had been a scholar back in Boston, a professor of natural sciences who had lost everything when his wife died, and his position at the university disappeared along with his focus. He thought the West would restore something in him, that fresh air and honest labor would fill the hollow place grief had carved. Instead, he had lasted 6 months before a cave-in at the Silver Bell mine took him and 4 other men. Natalie had stayed because she had nowhere else to go, and because something about these mountains had gotten into her blood. She made her living doing laundry and mending, taking in sewing from the miners and the few families that had put down roots. It was not much, but it was enough to rent a small room behind the bakery and keep herself fed. And in the early mornings before the town stirred, she had the mountains to herself. Or she had thought she did. The man she had seen that morning appeared at the general store 3 days later while she was picking up thread. He was even bigger up close, maybe 6 feet 3 inches of solid muscle wrapped in buckskin and worn denim. His face was weathered and strong-jawed, with eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to take in everything at once. His hair was indeed long, tied back with a leather cord, and he moved through the cramped store with surprising grace for someone his size. Quinlan Ashford, Mr. Henderson was saying behind the counter, "Did not expect to see you down from your place so soon. Everything all right up there?" "Fine, Henderson. Need some salt and coffee. Flour if you have it." His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together, but not unkind. Natalie tried not to stare as she paid for her thread, but she felt his eyes on her as she turned to leave. "Madam," he said, tipping his head slightly. She nodded back, her cheeks warming, and escaped into the bright afternoon. That evening, as she sat in her small room mending a torn shirt by lamplight, she wondered about Quinlan Ashford. She had heard the name before, she realized. The mountain man who lived up near the tree line, the one who came down maybe twice a year for supplies and otherwise kept to himself. Some of the miners said he was half wild himself, that he could track anything through any weather, that he knew the mountains better than any man alive. The next morning, Natalie returned to her rocky perch as always. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She had her routine. First she would listen for 10 minutes cataloging every sound. Then she would practice her calls, trying to match each one perfectly. Her father had taught her the basics before he died, showing her how to purse her lips for a wren's trill or use her throat for the deeper calls. Since then, she had taught herself, listening and practicing, until her imitations were flawless. She started with the easier ones today, working through the songbirds. A mountain chickadee, high and sweet, a Steller's jay, raucous and bold, a white-crowned sparrow, its descending whistle echoing across the canyon. She was deep into a complicated series of nuthatch calls when a voice behind her nearly made her fall off the outcropping. That is impressive. She spun around, heart hammering, to find Quinlan Ashford sitting on a boulder about 20 feet away. He must have approached in absolute silence, because she had heard nothing. "How long have you been there?" she demanded, one hand pressed to her chest. "About 10 minutes, did not want to interrupt." He stood, unfolding to his full considerable height. "You have been coming up here every morning for a while now. You have been watching me?" The thought sent a shiver through her that was not entirely fear. Not watching, just aware. "I know most of what moves in these mountains." He took a few steps closer, his expression curious rather than threatening. "Never heard anyone do what you do, though. You got every single one right. The chickadee, the jay, the sparrow, even the nuthatch variations." Natalie straightened her spine, trying not to feel quite so small next to him. "My father was a naturalist. He taught me to pay attention." "Well, he taught you good." Quinlan tilted his head, studying her. "You trying to catalog them or something else?" "I just like knowing, like being able to speak their language." She hesitated. "It makes me feel less alone, I suppose." Something shifted in his expression, a flash of understanding that surprised her. "I know what you mean." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the wind moving through the pines below them. "I should go," Natalie finally said. "I have work, sure." But he did not move. "You know the elk will be coming down to the meadow just before sunset today. The big one with the scarred shoulder. He has a bugle that sounds different from the others. Thought you might want to hear it." She blinked at him. "The meadow past Copper Creek? That is the one. Thank you. I will try to make it up there." He nodded and stepped aside to let her pass. As she started down the trail, she felt his eyes on her back and could not quite decide how she felt about it. She did go to the meadow that evening, telling herself it was purely for the opportunity to hear the elk. The sun was sinking behind the peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and rose, when the first bugle rang out. It was a sound both eerie and beautiful, starting low and rising to an almost musical note before descending again. And there, as Quinlan had said, was the scarred bull elk, his massive antlers silhouetted against the darkening sky. Natalie sat perfectly still behind a fallen log, hardly daring to breathe. 3 cows grazed nearby, and as she watched, the bull bugled again. This time she noticed what Quinlan had meant. There was a slight roughness to the call, a catch in the middle that made it distinctive. She was so focused on the elk that she did not notice Quinlan until he settled onto the ground beside her with barely a whisper of sound. "Told you," he murmured, his voice pitched low so as not to spook the animals. "How did you know?" she whispered back. "Been watching him for 3 years now. He comes to this meadow when the light is good, shows off for the cows even though it is not rutting season yet." They watched in silence as the elk grazed and bugled, and Natalie found herself intensely aware of the man beside her. He smelled of wood smoke and leather and something else, something wild and clean like the forest itself. His presence was solid and warm, and she realized with a start that she felt safer than she had in a very long time. When the elk finally moved off into the trees, Quinlan turned to her. "You want to try it, the bugle?" "I could not possibly." "Why not? You got all those birds perfect," she considered. "All right, show me." He demonstrated first, cupping his hands around his mouth and producing a passable imitation of the elk's call. Not perfect, but recognizable. Then he talked her through the technique, how to use her diaphragm and shape the sound. Her first attempt was laughable, barely more than a squeak. But Quinlan did not laugh. He just nodded and said, "Again, more air from your belly." They worked at it as the light faded, and by the time the first stars appeared, Natalie had produced something that almost sounded like an elk bugle. "Not bad," Quinlan said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Few more practice sessions and you will have it. I should get back to town. It will be full dark soon. I will walk with you. These trails are not safe alone at night." She wanted to protest that she had managed fine on her own for 3 years, but truthfully she was grateful for the company and his obvious knowledge of the terrain. They walked in comfortable silence, Quinlan leading the way with the confidence of someone who could navigate these mountains blindfolded. "Why do you live up here alone?" Natalie asked after a while. "Do you not get lonely?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I did at first. Came up here 5 years ago after some trouble down south. Needed to get away from people for a while. But the mountains, they get into you. They make sense in a way people do not always. Every sound means something. Every track tells a story. Nothing is false up here." "I think I understand that," she said softly. "Yeah, I think you might." They reached the edge of town and Quinlan stopped. I will leave you here. Not fond of too many folks knowing my business. Thank you for showing me the elk, and for walking me back. He looked down at her, and in the moonlight his features seemed softer. You are welcome up at my place if you ever want to see more. I got a spot where the foxes den, and there is a pair of golden eagles nesting on the north ridge. Things you might like. Natalie's heart did something complicated in her chest. I would like that very much. Good. He touched the brim of his hat and melted back into the shadows, leaving her standing alone in the quiet street. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Natalie would go to her morning spot to practice her calls, and more often than not, Quinlan would appear. Sometimes he would just listen. Other times he would tell her about animal behaviors she might not know, or point out distant movements she had missed. He was an encyclopedia of mountain knowledge, and she soaked up everything he shared like parched earth drinking rain. He took her to see the fox den, where 3 kits played in the late afternoon sun while their mother watched from the entrance. He showed her the eagle's nest, so high up on the cliff face she had to crane her neck until it ached. He taught her to identify tracks in scat, to read the stories written in bent grass and disturbed earth, and slowly, carefully they began to share pieces of themselves beyond the mountains. Natalie told him about her father, about Boston and the university, and the way grief could hollow a man out until there was nothing left but a shell. She told him about the loneliness of being the only woman in town without family or protection, about the men who thought she was available just because she was alone. She told him about her mother, who had died when Natalie was 15, an elegant woman who had loved music and poetry, and had tried to teach her daughter to move through the world with grace. Quinlan told her about growing up in Texas, about a father who drank and a mother who had died young, about learning to be hard because soft things did not survive in his world, about the trouble that had sent him north, a fight that had gone too far, a man who had pulled a knife and ended up on the wrong end of Quinlan's fists. Self-defense. But the man had been connected, and Quinlan had not wanted to wait around to see how frontier justice would play out. Sometimes I wonder if I am hiding or if I just found where I belong, he said one evening as they sat watching the sunset from a high meadow. Maybe both can be true, Natalie offered. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt something shift between them. The air seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Natalie, he started, then stopped, cleared his throat. I like spending time with you. That probably is obvious by now. Her pulse quickened. I like spending time with you too. Good, that is good. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly awkward in a way she had never seen him. Because I think about you a lot when I am up at my cabin alone. Think about your laugh and the way you get excited when you perfect a new call. Think about how you see these mountains the way I do, like they are something precious. Quinlan, she whispered. He reached out and took her hand, his palm rough and warm against hers. I know I am not much, just a man living alone in the wilderness, no real prospects or future, but I want you to know that you have become important to me. Real important. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. You are so much more than you think. You are the first person since my father died who has really seen me, who has not wanted something from me or tried to change me into something I am not. You are perfect as you are, he said fiercely. Strong and smart and brave, any man would be lucky to. He broke off, shaking his head. To what? She prompted, her heart racing. To be yours, he finished quietly. She squeezed his hand. Then I suppose you are lucky, because I have been yours for weeks now. I just did not know if you felt the same. The smile that broke across his face transformed him completely, chasing away the shadows and making him look years younger. Really? Really? He pulled her close, and she went willingly, tucking herself against his broad chest. His arms came around her, solid and protective, and she felt something in her that had been wound tight for years finally begin to relax. These mountains need you, Quinlan murmured into her hair. I need you. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. What do you mean? I mean, I have been alone up here for 5 years, and I thought that was what I wanted, what I needed. Then you showed up on that rock every morning, learning to speak the language of every creature in this valley, and I realized something. The mountains are alive with voices, and you hear every single one. You belong here in a way most people never will, and he cupped her face with both hands, his touch infinitely gentle despite his size and strength. I cannot imagine these mountains without you in them anymore. Natalie felt a tear slip down her cheek. I cannot imagine them without you either. When he kissed her, it was soft and careful, a question more than a demand. she answered by pressing closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, and she felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, her whole world narrowing to this moment. This man, this perfect rightness of being exactly where she belonged. They broke apart slowly, both breathing hard. Quinlan rested his forehead against hers. "Come up to the cabin with me," he said. "Not tonight, but soon. Let me show you the full territory, everything I know. Let me share it with you properly." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I want that." They sat together as the stars came out, talking quietly about nothing and everything, until Natalie finally admitted she needed to get back to town. Quinlan walked her down as always, but this time when they reached the edge of Colorado City, he kissed her again. Long and thorough before disappearing into the night, Natalie floated back to her little room, her lips still tingling. Her heart so full she thought it might burst. The next few weeks passed in a blur of joy. Natalie continued her morning routine, but now Quinlan was a regular presence, and their time together took on a new sweetness. He was openly affectionate now, always finding excuses to touch her a hand at the small of her back as they walked, his fingers brushing hers as he pointed out a distant animal, stolen kisses when they were alone in the wilderness. He took her up to his cabin finally, a sturdy structure he had built himself, nestled against a rocky outcropping with a view that stretched for miles. It was simple but well made, with a stone fireplace and windows positioned to catch the light. The inside was neat and spare, everything in its place, with shelves lined with books that surprised her. "You read," she said, running her fingers along the spines. "Not much else to do in winter when you are snowed in for weeks at a time." He looked almost embarrassed. "Probably not the fancy stuff you are used to. My father and I lost most of our books in the move west." She pulled out a worn copy of Walden. "I have not read anything in years except the labels on flour sacks. Take whatever you want. I have read them all multiple times." She looked at him, this mountain man who could track a fox in the dark, and also owned a collection of Thoreau and Emerson, and felt herself fall even deeper. He made them lunch venison stew that had been simmering over the fire, with bread he had baked himself. They ate sitting on his porch, looking out over the valley, and Natalie felt a sense of peace she had not experienced since before her mother died. "I could stay here forever," she said without thinking, then blushed. "I am sorry. I did not mean. I want you to." Quinlan interrupted. His gray eyes were serious. "I want you to stay here forever, with me." Her breath caught. "Quinlan, I know it is fast. I know we have only been courting for a few weeks. But I am 32 years old, Natalie. I have been alone most of my life, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are smart and brave, and you understand this place in your bones. You can name every animal call in this valley without missing a single one. You belong here." He set down his bowl and took her hands. "I am not a man who does things halfway. When I commit to something, I commit fully, and I am committed to you if you will have me." Natalie's heart thundered in her chest. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you to build a life with me. Yes, marriage if you want the formality. But more than that, I am asking you to be my partner in all of this, to help me take care of these mountains, to share everything I have and know, to stand beside me through whatever comes." His voice dropped lower. "I am asking you to let me take care of you, protect you, love you for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down her face now. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." The kiss he gave her then was full of promise and passion, his strong arms pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning. "We should go to town, do it properly, get the preacher, make it legal." "When?" She felt dizzy with happiness. "Tomorrow if you want, or we can wait. Give you time to be sure." "I am sure," she said firmly. "I have been sure since the day you showed me the elk. Maybe even before that." "Tomorrow, then." He kissed her again, softer this time. "You are going to be so happy here." "Natalie, I swear to you, I will spend every day making sure of it." True to his word, they rode down to Colorado City together the next morning. Natalie packed up her few belongings while Quinlan spoke to the preacher. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with just a handful of witnesses, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, the baker who had rented Natalie her room, and a few others who knew her from around town. Natalie wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Quinlan had cleaned up as much as his lifestyle allowed, his hair tied back neatly, wearing what was clearly his only set of good clothes. He looked uncomfortable in the formal setting, but never took his eyes off her. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quinlan kissed her with such tenderness that Mrs. Henderson sniffled into her handkerchief. Afterward, they shared a meal at the boarding house dining room, and Natalie said her goodbyes to the few people she had known in town. It felt strange to be leaving this place that had been her home for 3 years, but when she looked at Quinlan, saw the promise in his eyes, she felt no fear at all. They rode up to the cabin in the golden afternoon light, Natalie seated in front of Quinlan on his big bay horse, her belongings packed on a mule trailing behind. He kept one arm wrapped securely around her waist, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the territory. "There is so much I want to show you," he said as the cabin came into view. "So many places I have found over the years. Secret meadows, hidden springs, caves that go back into the mountain. We have all the time in the world now." That night, in the cabin that was now her home, Quinlan made love to her with the same careful intensity he brought to everything else. He was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and wanted, and when she finally fell asleep in his arms, the sound of wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl drifting through the open window, Natalie knew she had found exactly where she belonged. The next months were the happiest of Natalie's life. She learned the rhythms of living in the mountains, the daily tasks that kept them fed and warm. Quinlan taught her to shoot, first with a rifle, and then with the pistol he insisted she carry when she went out alone. He showed her how to dress game, how to tan hides, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of the animals. She, in turn, brought something to his life he had not realized he was missing. The cabin that had been merely functional became a home, with wildflowers on the table and curtains she sewed for the windows. She organized his books and added her own touches, sketches of birds she tacked to the walls, a collection of interesting stones arranged on the mantel. And every morning she continued her practice, her calls echoing through the valley while Quinlan watched with undisguised pride. "You got a gift," he told her one morning after she perfectly replicated the complex song of a canyon wren. "Never heard anything like it. I have a good teacher," she said, kissing his cheek. "You have taught me more about these mountains than my father ever could have." "We teach each other," he corrected. "You showed me how to really listen. I knew the calls before, could identify them, but you hear the music in them, the patterns and variations. You have made me appreciate it all in a new way." They developed their own routines and rituals. In the mornings, Natalie would go to her rocky perch while Quinlan checked his trap lines. They would meet back at the cabin for a midday meal, then spend the afternoons exploring or working on whatever projects needed doing. Evenings were for sitting on the porch watching the sunset, for reading aloud to each other, for making love and falling asleep wrapped around each other. Summer gave way to autumn, and the mountains exploded in color. Quinlan took Natalie to places he had never shown another soul: a hot spring hidden in a grove of aspens, a waterfall that dropped into a pool so clear you could see the trout darting below the surface, a meadow where the elk gathered in such numbers the ground seemed to move. They worked together to prepare for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, hunting and preserving meat, gathering the last of the wild berries and roots. Natalie learned to make pemmican and jerky, to store vegetables in the cold cellar Quinlan had dug into the hillside. "Will we be all right up here when the snows come?" she asked one evening as they watched the first flakes begin to fall. "More than all right. I have been doing this alone for 5 years. With 2 of us it will be easier." He pulled her close and a lot warmer. He was right. The winter, when it came in earnest, was not the ordeal Natalie had feared. Yes, they were snowed in for days at a time, but the cabin was tight and warm, their supplies were ample, and she had Quinlan. They spent the long evenings talking and reading, playing cards and chess, making love by the firelight. Quinlan taught her to carve wood, and she made a set of birds that she lined up on the windowsill. She taught him the folk songs her mother had loved, and sometimes they would sing together while the wind howled outside. On clear days, they would bundle up and go out into the transformed landscape. Quinlan showed her how to track animals in the snow, how to find food even in the dead of winter. They saw wolves once, a pack of 5 moving like gray ghosts through the trees. Another time they came across a mountain lion's kill, and Quinlan made sure she understood how to recognize the signs and stay safe. "You are not afraid up here at all anymore, are you?" he observed one afternoon as they were snowshoeing back to the cabin. Natalie considered. "No, I trust you to keep me safe, and I trust myself more than I used to. You have given me that. You always had it in you. I just helped you see it." That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind, Natalie said, "I want to stay here forever. I never want to go back down to Colorado City or anywhere else." "Is that foolish?" "Not foolish at all." Quinlan's arms tightened around her. "This is our place, Our kingdom, if you want to think of it that way. Everything we need is right here. Everything I need is right here, she corrected. Touching his face in the darkness, spring came slowly to the high country, first in fits and starts, then in a rush of snowmelt and new growth. The meadows exploded with wildflowers, and the animals emerged from their winter dens with new young. Natalie had never seen anything so beautiful, this annual miracle of renewal. It was in late April, as they were watching a doe and her twin fawns graze in the meadow below the cabin, that Natalie realized her monthly courses were late, very late. She said nothing at first, wanting to be sure. But as the days turned into weeks and other signs appeared, her breasts tender, a slight nausea in the mornings, an overwhelming tiredness in the afternoons, she became certain. She waited until they were sitting on the porch one evening, the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, to tell him. "Quinlan, I need to tell you something." He looked over at her, immediately attentive to the serious note in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right. She took a breath. "I am carrying your child." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be. I think I am maybe 2 months along." He let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley and scooped her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby, Natalie. You have made me the happiest man alive. You are happy about it? I know we have only been married 8 months, and this place is not exactly easy. Happy?" He cupped her face in his hands. "I am overjoyed, scared as hell, but overjoyed. We are going to be a family, a real family." Over the following months, Quinlan became even more protective than usual. He insisted on doing all the heavy work, would barely let her lift anything heavier than a cookpot. He made her promise not to go too far from the cabin alone, and he spent hours fashioning a cradle from pine, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Natalie felt herself bloom along with the summer. Despite the discomforts of pregnancy, she had never been healthier or happier. She continued her morning practice, her calls ringing out across the valley, and she liked to imagine the baby could hear them, was learning the language of the mountains from inside her womb. "What do you think?" she asked Quinlan one evening, her hands on her swelling belly. "Boy or girl? Does not matter to me one bit, long as you both come through healthy." He placed his hand over hers, his palm warm and large. "Though I will admit, the thought of a little girl with your eyes and your gift for understanding this place makes my heart do strange things. And if it is a boy, then I will teach him everything I know, and he will grow up strong and capable, able to take care of himself and whatever family he chooses to build." As summer turned to autumn and Natalie's belly grew round and tight, they began to discuss logistics. The nearest doctor was in Colorado City, a full day's ride away. Quinlan wanted to take her down to town before the baby came, to stay there where there would be help if something went wrong, but Natalie refused. "I want our baby born here in these mountains. This is home. This is where we belong." "Natalie, be reasonable. What if something happens? What if then we deal with it together, like we deal with everything else? Women have been having babies in the wilderness since the beginning of time. I am strong and healthy, and I have you." She took his hand. "Please, Quinlan. I need to do this here." He finally agreed, though she could see the fear in his eyes. He made a trip down to Colorado City and came back with medical supplies and a book on childbirth that he read cover to cover 3 times. He arranged with a woman named Sarah Colton, a midwife who lived halfway between their cabin and the town, to come up when Natalie's time was near. The pains started on a cold October morning, early and insistent. Quinlan immediately went to fetch Sarah while Natalie paced the cabin, breathing through the contractions. By the time he returned with the midwife, the pains were coming faster. Sarah was a competent, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had delivered more babies than she could count. She took one look at Natalie and nodded approvingly. "Good, strong girl. You will do fine." She turned to Quinlan, who looked pale and stricken. "Go boil water and tear up some clean cloths. And breathe, man. Your wife needs you calm." The labor lasted through the day and into the evening. It was hard and painful and exhausting, but every time Natalie felt like she could not go on, she would look at Quinlan's face and find the strength to continue. He stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, Natalie gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "A boy," Sarah announced, holding up the squalling infant, A big, healthy boy. Quinlan's face did something complicated, cycling through relief and joy and wonder in the space of a heartbeat. Sarah cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Natalie's arms. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being pushed into the cold world, but absolutely perfect. He had dark hair like Quinlan and a strong grip that reminded her of his father. "Hello, little one," Natalie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome home." Quinlan sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, his free hand gently touching the baby's downy head. "He is incredible. You are incredible. I cannot believe we made him. What should we name him?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at her son, Natalie thought of her father, who had brought her west and taught her to love the natural world. "I want to call him Thomas after my father." "Thomas Ashford." Quinlan's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thomas. Yeah, I like that. Tom for short when he is running around getting into trouble." Sarah stayed with them for 3 days, making sure both Natalie and the baby were healthy and that Natalie knew how to nurse. When she finally left, she clasped Natalie's hand. "You did well, girl. That man of yours, he is a good one. You take care of each other." "We will," Natalie promised. Those first weeks with Thomas were both harder and more wonderful than Natalie could have imagined. The baby needed constant attention, and she was exhausted from the birth and from waking every few hours to feed him. But every time she looked at his tiny face or felt his small hand wrap around her finger, her heart swelled to bursting. Quinlan was a natural father. He was patient and gentle, unafraid of the messy realities of caring for an infant. He would walk Thomas around the cabin for hours when the baby was fussy, singing old trail songs in his deep voice until Thomas quieted. He made sure Natalie ate and rested, taking over as many of the household tasks as he could manage. "You are so good with him," Natalie said one night, watching Quinlan rock their sleeping son. "He is mine to protect," Quinlan said simply. "Both of you are. It is what I was made for, I think, taking care of my family in these mountains." As Thomas grew from a newborn into an infant, the cabin adapted to accommodate him. His cradle sat beside their bed, and the table was always scattered with clean cloths and tiny garments Natalie sewed. The sounds of the cabin changed too. Instead of just the crackle of the fire and the wind outside, there were baby gurgles and cries, Natalie's soft lullabies, Quinlan's deep laugh when Thomas did something particularly amusing. Winter came again, and this time they were 3 instead of 2. Natalie would bundle Thomas in furs and take him out onto the porch to show him the mountains, talking to him about the animals and the trees even though he was too young to understand. She continued her morning practice when the weather allowed, and sometimes she would imitate calls while Thomas watched with wide eyes, his little face serious and focused. "He is listening," Quinlan observed one morning. "Really listening, like he knows what you are doing." "He is going to grow up knowing the language of this place," Natalie said. "He will be as much a part of these mountains as the elk and the eagles. He is lucky to have you for a mother, to have this for a life." Quinlan looked out over the snow-covered valley. "I keep thinking about how different my childhood was. The anger and the violence, the feeling that I never really belonged anywhere. And now I look at Thomas, and I know he will never feel that way. He will grow up knowing he is loved and wanted, that he has a place in the world." Natalie squeezed his hand. "You had a hand in creating that. You chose to be different from your father, to build something better. That takes courage. We built it together," he corrected. By the time spring returned and Thomas was 6 months old, Natalie realized something. She was pregnant again. The realization brought a mix of emotions. She was thrilled at the prospect of another child, but also daunted by the idea of going through pregnancy and birth again so soon. When she told Quinlan, his reaction was immediate delight, quickly followed by concern. "Are you all right? Is it too soon? Maybe we should go down to town this time, stay there until after the baby comes." "I am fine. And no, we are staying here. We did it once. We can do it again." She took his hands. "Besides, I want all our children born in these mountains. It feels important somehow, like we are giving them roots in this place." This pregnancy was harder than the first. Chasing after an active baby while growing another one was exhausting, and there were days Natalie felt completely wrung out. But Quinlan was endlessly supportive, taking over even more of the childcare and household work, insisting she rest whenever possible. Thomas was 14 months old when his sister was born on a warm June morning. The labor was faster this time, and by early afternoon Natalie was holding a tiny, dark-haired girl who looked like a perfect doll. "She is beautiful," Quinlan breathed, his finger stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek, just like her mother. They named her Grace for the way she had entered their lives like an unexpected blessing. Thomas was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his chubby hands. Quinlan had to keep a close eye on him to make sure his loving attention did not get too rough. With 2 children, life in the mountains became more complex but no less joyful. The cabin was never quiet now, filled with Thomas's babbling and Grace's cries and the constant hum of family life. Natalie sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands on her time and energy, but when she looked around at her home, at Quinlan playing with Thomas while Grace slept against his broad chest, she knew she would not trade this life for anything. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew tall and strong, his legs sturdy beneath him as he toddled after his father, determined to help with every task. Grace was quieter but observant, her dark eyes taking in everything around her. As soon as they were old enough, both children learned to identify animal tracks and calls, mimicking their mother's morning practice with varying degrees of success. When Thomas was 4 and Grace was 3, Natalie found herself pregnant for a 3rd time. This baby came in the dead of winter, a howling February night when the snow was piled high against the cabin walls. Another boy, who they named Jack for Quinlan's mother's father, the one good man in his family history, and so their family grew, each child adding new dimensions of love and chaos. Quinlan proved endlessly patient, teaching the children to ride and shoot and survive in the wilderness. Natalie taught them to read and write, using the books from Quinlan's shelves, and continued their education in the natural world. Thomas, at 8 years old, could identify every large mammal track in the territory. Grace, at 7, had a particular gift for imitating bird calls, her voice high and clear. Little Jack, now 4, was fearless to the point of being concerning, always trying to climb higher and run faster than his body was ready for. Natalie was 30 now, Quinlan 38, and sometimes when they lay in bed at night after the children were finally asleep, they would marvel at the life they had built. "Did you ever imagine this?" Natalie asked one night. "Back when you first saw me on that rock, practicing my calls?" "No," Quinlan admitted. "I thought you were interesting, beautiful, but I could not have imagined all of this. The cabin full of children, the feeling of coming home to something real every day. You gave me that." "We gave it to each other," she corrected, echoing his words from years ago. One late summer morning when Thomas was 9, he came running back to the cabin from his exploration with news. "There is a family down by Copper Creek," he reported breathlessly, "setting up a camp. They have a wagon and everything." Quinlan frowned. "What kind of family?" "Not sure, did not get too close, but they have kids. Saw at least 2. It was the first time in years that anyone had ventured this far into their territory." Quinlan and Natalie exchanged glances. "I should go check it out," Quinlan said. "Make sure they are not planning to stay permanently. This land cannot support too many people." "I am coming with you," Natalie said. They left the children with Grace in charge. She was responsible enough at 10 to watch her brothers for a few hours and rode down to Copper Creek. Sure enough, there was a wagon and a makeshift camp, and a family that looked tired and worn. The man stood up when he saw them approach, his hand moving to his rifle but not grabbing it. He was younger than Quinlan, maybe 30, with a haggard face and wary eyes. "Afternoon," Quinlan called out, keeping his voice neutral. "You folks lost?" "Not lost," the man said. "Just looking for a place to settle. Heard there might be land up this way." Quinlan shook his head. "This territory is claimed. My wife and I have been here for 13 years. We have children, a life. Cannot have others settling too close. Resources are limited." The man's face fell. Behind him, a woman appeared from the wagon, holding a small child. She looked exhausted and scared. Natalie's heart clenched. She remembered being that woman, alone and uncertain in an unforgiving land. "How long have you been traveling?" she asked gently. 3 months, the woman said. "We came from Kansas. The grasshoppers destroyed everything. We had to leave." "Where were you heading?" "Just west. Anywhere we could start over." Natalie looked at Quinlan. She could see him calculating, weighing options. Finally, he sighed. "Colorado City is about 8 miles south of here. It has grown some since we left it. They might have work for a man willing to labor. Land too, if you are patient and save your money. But that is back the way we came," the man protested. "Then you have not lost much time. Look, I am sorry, but I protect what is mine. My family needs this territory. But I am not heartless. We will give you supplies to get you to Colorado City, food, a little money if you need it, help you get started." The man looked like he might argue, but his wife touched his arm and he deflated. "Thank you. We appreciate the help." They spent the next hour helping the family repack their wagon and providing enough food to last them a week. Natalie even gave the woman a baby blanket she had made, seeing how thin the child looked. As they rode back toward their cabin, Natalie said, "That was kind of you. Giving them supplies, could not just send them away with nothing." "But I meant what I said. This place is ours. I will not have it overrun with settlers." "I know, and I agree. I just felt sorry for them." "So did I. But our children come first." It was a reminder that even in their mountain paradise, the outside world existed and occasionally intruded. But they had built something strong enough to weather such intrusions. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with an easy confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and where he belonged. He could track anything, shoot straight, and handle himself in any situation the mountains threw at him. Grace developed her mother's gift for animal calls to an astonishing degree. By the time she was 12, she could imitate every sound in the valley perfectly, and she had started experimenting with calls from birds her mother had never heard, learning them from visitors to Colorado City or from books. Jack was the wild one, always pushing boundaries, but he had a good heart and a quick mind. He was the one who made them all laugh, who could diffuse tension with a joke or a silly face. When Thomas turned 16, he started talking about wanting to see more of the world beyond their mountain territory. It terrified Natalie, the thought of her firstborn venturing out into the dangerous world, but she understood it too. He was young and curious, and she could not keep him tethered forever. "Let him go," Quinlan advised one night after Thomas had gone to bed. "He needs to see what else is out there so he can decide for himself where he wants to be. If we try to hold him too tight, we will lose him for good. What if something happens to him? We raised him right. He can take care of himself, and he will come back. This place is in his blood, same as it is in ours." So when Thomas announced he wanted to spend a season in Denver, working and learning the city, they let him go. It was one of the hardest things Natalie had ever done, watching him ride down the mountain with his pack on his back, but she smiled and waved and did not let him see her cry. He came back 6 months later looking older and more serious, but with a light in his eyes. "Well?" Quinlan asked. "Denver is amazing," Thomas said. "So many people, so much happening all the time. I am glad I went." "But," Natalie prompted. Hearing the unspoken word, Thomas grinned. "But I missed the quiet, missed waking up to elk bugling and going to sleep with the wind in the pines. The city is fine for a visit, but it is not home. This is home." Natalie hugged him tight, relief flooding through her. Grace showed no interest in leaving. She was happy in the mountains, content with her family and her animals and her calls. She talked sometimes about wanting to document all the birds of the Colorado high country, to create a comprehensive guide with descriptions of their songs. "You should do it," Natalie encouraged. "Your father and I could help. We could make something really special." And so they did, the three of them spending hours observing and documenting, with Quinlan sketching the birds while Natalie and Grace described their calls. It became a project that spanned years, a labor of love that they worked on whenever time allowed. Jack eventually settled down some, though he never lost his adventurous spirit. He was the one who explored the farthest reaches of their territory, who found new caves and hidden valleys, who pushed the boundaries of what they knew. By the time Natalie was 40, she and Quinlan had been married for 19 years. Thomas was 18 and talking about courting a girl he had met in Colorado City during a supply run. Grace was 17 and working on her bird guide. Jack was 14 and still trying to give them gray hairs. "We did good," Quinlan said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. The children were down by the creek, their laughter drifting up through the trees. "We did," Natalie agreed, leaning against him. "You know what I think about sometimes? What, that day I first saw you on that rock, making those perfect bird calls. If I had just kept riding, if I had not stopped to listen, none of this would exist. This whole beautiful life we built would not be." Natalie turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than one. His hair was shot through with gray now, his face more lined, but his eyes were still storm gray and clear, and when he looked at her, she still felt that same flutter in her chest. "I think we would have found each other somehow," she said. "I think these mountains brought us together because we both belonged here." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that spoke of 19 years of love and commitment and partnership. "I love you," he said. More now than even in the beginning, which I would not have thought possible. I love you too. So much. They sat together as the stars came out, listening to the sounds of the valley, an owl hooting somewhere in the distance, the creek running over stones, their children's voices. And Natalie thought about all the animal calls she had learned, all the voices of the wilderness she could now speak. But the most important language she had learned was the language of love, of family, of building a life with someone who saw her truly and completely. 2 years later, Thomas married the girl from Colorado City, a sweet-natured young woman named Emma, who took to mountain life with surprising ease. They built their own cabin on the far edge of the territory, close enough to visit but far enough for independence. Within a year, they made Natalie and Quinlan grandparents, a baby girl with Thomas's dark hair and Emma's blue eyes. Grace continued her work on the bird guide and eventually drew the attention of a professor from the university in Boulder, who was impressed by the depth and accuracy of her observations. He offered to help her publish it, and at 21, Grace's guide became the definitive reference for birds of the Colorado Rockies. Jack eventually found his calling as well, working with his father to build up a small but profitable operation, providing guide services to wealthy Easterners who wanted to hunt in the mountains. He had his father's knowledge and his mother's ability to read the land, and his friendly nature made him popular with clients. As Natalie entered her mid-40s, she sometimes reflected on the strange path her life had taken. If someone had told that grief-stricken 18-year-old girl in Colorado City that she would end up here married to a mountain man, mother of 3, grandmother to a growing brood, expert on every creature in the valley, she would not have believed them. But here she was, and she had never been happier. She still did her morning practice, though her knees protested the climb to her rocky perch more than they used to. Her calls were as clear and accurate as ever, and sometimes she would look down at the valley spread below her and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for all of it. One morning, Quinlan climbed up to join her, moving slower than he once had but still sure-footed on the steep trail. He was 50 now, his hair mostly gray, but still strong and capable. "Been thinking," he said, settling beside her. "About what?" "About that thing I said to you all those years ago, about how these mountains need you. I remember, was right. Look at what you have done here. You have documented every creature, taught your children to understand and respect this place, helped build a legacy that will last long after we are gone. These mountains do need you." Natalie took his hand, calloused and familiar. "They need both of us. I could not have done any of it without you." "Partners," he said. "Partners," she agreed. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, and Natalie thought about all the years behind them and however many remained ahead. She thought about the language of love and wild places, about the voices of the wilderness that she had learned to speak fluently. She thought about her children and grandchildren, about the legacy they were building together. And then she opened her mouth and gave a perfect imitation of a golden eagle's cry, high and piercing and free. It echoed across the valley, and from somewhere in the distance a real eagle answered. Quinlan squeezed her hand and smiled. They walked back to the cabin together, his arm around her shoulders, and as they crested the last rise and saw their home nestled against the mountain, smoke rising from the chimney, Natalie felt that same sense of rightness she had felt on her wedding day. This was where she belonged. This was what she was meant for. Not just to name every animal call in the valley without missing, though she had done that, but to build a life, to raise a family, to love and be loved by a man who understood her completely. The mountains had needed her, yes, but she had needed them just as much, and together she and Quinlan had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would echo through generations just like her perfect bird calls echoed across the canyon walls. As they reached the cabin, Grace emerged with her latest sketches, eager to show them a new variation in the canyon wren song she had discovered. Jack called out from the corral, where he was working with the horses, and in the distance they could see Thomas and Emma walking up the trail with the baby. Natalie looked at Quinlan and he looked back at her, and no words were needed. Everything they had ever wanted was right here, in this moment, in this place. She had named every animal call in the valley without missing. The mountain man had said these mountains needed her, and she had found in answering that need that she had found herself, found her purpose, found her home, found her forever. Years continued to flow past like the creek below their cabin, steady and sure. Natalie was 50 now, her hair showing silver threads, her hands showing the wear of decades of mountain living. But she was healthy and strong. And she still made the climb to her perch most mornings, her calls as clear and true as ever. Quinlan was 58, moving a bit slower but no less capable. Together they had weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical, and their love had only deepened with time. They knew each other's rhythms and patterns as well as they knew the seasons of the mountains. Thomas and Emma had given them 3 grandchildren now, all growing up wild and free in the high country. Grace had married a fellow naturalist she met through her publishing connections, and they lived in a cabin Grace and her husband built together near a beaver pond Grace had been studying for years. Jack was courting a rancher's daughter from the valley below, a capable woman who could ride and shoot as well as he could. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the original cabin. They roasted an elk Thomas had brought down, and they told stories late into the night, with the grandchildren falling asleep one by one until they were carried to their bedrolls. When everyone had finally settled and the cabin was quiet except for the sounds of sleeping people and the crackling fire, Natalie and Quinlan slipped outside to sit on their porch. 25 years, Natalie said wonderingly. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 25 years of my life, Quinlan said. Every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, the times we fought or struggled. Especially those days. They showed us what we are made of. Showed us that what we built together is strong enough to weather anything. Natalie rested her head on his shoulder. I keep thinking about how different my life would have been if I had never come west. If my father had not chased his dream and brought me here. If you had not noticed me that morning and decided to approach. Everything happens the way it is supposed to, Quinlan said. I believe that now. I spent so many years angry at my past, at the hand I was dealt. But all of it led me here to you, to this, so I cannot regret it. I cannot regret any of it either. Even the painful parts made me who I am, made us who we are. They sat in comfortable silence, looking out at the moonlit mountains. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled, and another answered. Natalie knew their voices, could distinguish between the pack members by their individual calls. Do you remember when you told me I named every animal call in the valley without missing? She asked. Of course. Do you know what I realized recently? I do not just know the calls, I know the animals themselves, their behaviors, their territories, their families. I know which doe comes to the meadow below the cabin every spring and which owl nests in the dead pine by the north ridge. I know them the way I know our children and grandchildren. You are part of this place, Quinlan said. As much as the trees or the rocks or the rivers, you belong here in a way most people never belong anywhere. We belong here, she corrected. Yeah, we do. As they sat together under the vast star-studded sky, Natalie felt a profound sense of peace. She had lived a good life. Not an easy life, there had been hardships and losses and struggles, but a good life full of love and purpose and meaning. She thought about the girl she had been at 18, lost and grieving, making bird calls on a rocky perch because it was the only thing that made her feel connected to something. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and capable and surrounded by family. The journey between those two people had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had been worth every step. These mountains did need me, she said softly, but I needed them more. They gave me you, and you gave me everything else. Quinlan kissed the top of her head. We gave each other everything. That is what love is, I think. Not just taking or giving, but building something together that is bigger than either person alone. Yes, she agreed. That is exactly what it is. Inside the cabin, one of the grandchildren cried out in sleep, then settled. The fire crackled. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Natalie closed her eyes and listened to all of it, this symphony of life that she had become so fluent in. Every sound told a story, every voice had meaning, and she understood all of it, could speak all of it, was woven into the very fabric of this wild place. She had named every animal call in the valley without missing. But more importantly, she had found her own voice here, had learned to call out her joy and her pain, her love and her fear, and had found someone who answered every single time. The mountain man had said these mountains needed her, and he had been right, but what he perhaps had not known then, what maybe neither of them had known, was that she would need these mountains and him just as much, that they would need each other, would build a life together that would ripple out through generations, would leave a mark on these wild peaks that would last long after they were gone. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Natalie stood and stretched. Quinlan rose with her, his hand finding hers automatically. Ready for another day? He asked. Always, she said, as long as you are beside me. They went inside together, to the cabin full of sleeping family, to the life they had built with their own hands and hearts. And as the sun rose over the Colorado Rockies, painting the peaks in fire and gold, the valley below, filled with the morning calls of birds greeting the new day, Natalie smiled, recognizing every single voice. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all.